Thank you. Good morning and welcome to the AWS Enterprise Summit 2016. It is just amazing to see so many of you once again come and join us and battle through the traffic and the rail systems to get here. So thank you very much to everybody for being here. It was at this event in 2015 that I made my first sort of public outing within AWS. And I have to tell you, what a difference 12 months makes, what a difference a year makes. So for example, at this event in 2015, we had around 500 people in the audience. We had people that couldn't get into the room because the venue was packed. And at that point, we had around 50% of the people in the room that were using something on AWS. Okay, there were some people using production workloads. There were some people that were just trying out AWS for the first time. And you fast forward 12 months to 2016, and we have here, there's still people pouring in. We have more than 1,000 people here in the room, and around 80% of the people in the room are using something in the form of AWS. And 44% of people in the room are using multiple production workloads on AWS as well. So what a difference a year makes. Last year as well, we said that we had tens of thousands of partners that were using or building value around the AWS stack. And this year in 2016, we've swelled that partner base by more than 50% year on year. So you can always tell when you're part of some sort of movement, when the ecosystem sort of flocks and gravitates towards the opportunity. And of course, the enterprise dialogue itself has also matured over the last 12 months. And marked enterprise customers are now very comfortable about sharing their stories and sharing their journeys to cloud with AWS. So companies like Aviva in the last 12 months, and AstraZeneca, and KPMG, and the Ministry of Justice, Financial Conduct Authority, and many more regulated markets getting very comfortable with talking about the AWS cloud. And so the reason I say these things is because if you look to your left and you look to your right, there's many questions that you have about cloud and cloud adoption and so on, and you're likely to find some of those answers right here in the room with the people that you speak to on a daily basis. And for those that don't, we have an agenda that is ram-packed full of customer stories that will help illuminate some of the questions that you have. So let's just walk through that agenda right now. So I'm very pleased to say that we're going to be joined by the Vice President of our security products and also our Chief Information Security Officer, Stephen Schmidt. And who better to talk about enterprise security right in the cloud than Stephen. And Stephen's going to be joined by a number of our customers who are going to take you through their stories about how they are adopting cloud. I'm then going to, hopefully, Stephen and friends would have built up an appetite for you, and you'll be out there having some lunch for a short while. And then I'm going to introduce you back in, and we're going to have the afternoon sessions. And the afternoon sessions are going to be talking about, in a much sort of deeper sense, how customers are adopting cloud computing. We're going to talk about big data in particular context for BI, and we're going to do a deep dive into Amazon QuickSight. And then also how customers are migrating production workloads into the AWS cloud. And then later on in this afternoon, after the break, I'm delighted that we're going to be joined by Mike Clayville. Mike Clayville is the VP for all of our customer-facing teams that we have here at AWS. And it's often still a surprise to many customers I speak to say that we actually have a large and growing field team that supports our customers to help them be more successful in the AWS cloud. And we do, of course, and many of you experience that on a daily basis. So we do have a team of account managers that are here to help you become more successful. They're the interface between your company and our company. We have a number of experts in the form of solutions architects that help make sure that you are sort of well architected, you're secure, and you're optimized in the cloud. We have a whole portfolio of various different technical support contracts that you can take with AWS, and up to and including an enterprise grade of support where you get access to dedicated teams of people that will work client-side with you to help you become more successful with your projects. We have what I really believe to be one of the secret ingredients to successful deployments in the cloud, and that is our training certifications team. I think once you are able to empower teams and give them the freedom to go and build wonderful applications in the cloud, you can really get more productivity out of your developers. And so training certification is a big thing. And then likewise with professional services. Our professional services teams are here to help your projects become more successful in the cloud. So we have a very large and growing customer field team, and they're all here. Many of them are here in the room and outside today. So please pick them out. They'll be wearing black polo shirts with AWS on the breast. So you'll see them out in the halls here. I do want to remind the folks in the room as well that this time last year, we announced that we were coming to the UK with a region, a data center region, a cluster of data centers. I should explain at this point, for those that are new to AWS and new to the cloud, our vernacular when we say that we're launching a region here in the UK. So a region to us is a geographical location. In this case, it's the United Kingdom. And within that geographical region, we have a number of what we refer to as availability zones that are, again, geographically dispersed for high availability. And within those availability zones, we have data centers. So a region is a cluster of data centers. It's not equal to one sort of data center. And so it's a big investment, and hopefully it'll help you with your data sovereignty issues that some of you may have, and certainly will be helpful in customers that are looking for low latency applications. So that's coming. It's due to come either towards the end of this year or the very beginning of next year. We're bang on track, and we can't wait to open the doors to that in the very near term. So look out for that. In these sessions, your feedback is super important to us. We believe that we can invent on your behalf more successfully with the feedback that you get. You're always a very generous and vocal audience, and we appreciate you doing that. So please go ahead and follow us at the AWS_UK and Ireland, UKI hashtag. Handle and the hashtag AWS Summits, and follow the discussion and contribute your questions and discussions. If you want to loop me into those discussions as well, I am Gavin P. Jackson 1. I said that I was pretty late to Twitter, so feel free to do that. But let's get the dialogue moving, and we'll have some fun in that. I want to take the time before I hand over to Steve to thank once again our partners who take the form of our sponsors for these events. We can't do these events without our sponsors, so we're super grateful to the people that are on this side of the hall and on this side of the hall, a number of our partners that are all adding value to the AWS cloud and adding value to our customers. I particularly want to point out our gold sponsors, and then of course our platinum sponsor here, Clarinet Bashton. The other thing to point out is that on this side, as you exit the doors this side, and towards the back end of the room here in the corner, you'll find an Internet of Things room. And the idea behind the Internet of Things room is to hopefully inspire the next generation of Internet of Things use cases and ideas. So there's a number of demos in there that you'll see and you'll be able to tinker with. And it's a great place to go and experiment and have some fun with the Internet of Things booth. So please go ahead and do that. And so really, I'm your host for today. I'm going to be introducing the various speakers and the various different talking points in the sessions. And now really it just remains for me just to thank you once again for battling your way into the room today. We're always super appreciative of the time that you come and spend with us. And so with that, let me now just hand over to our Chief Information Security Officer, Stephen Schmidt. Thank you.
Somebody left me a present. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the AWS Enterprise Summit. I want to take a moment here before I get into my main discussion of democratization of security and talk a little bit about AWS itself. We have some new faces in the audience here, and I want to make sure that we're all operating on the same page when we start throwing around terms and help people understand where we are. Some of the part of being at AWS that I love the most is the rapidity in which we innovate. And that's one of the things that sets us apart as an organization. Now, if you look at AWS and you look at the people in the room here, you are representative of our customer base. And that's more than 1 million customers a month who are actively using our services. And active use means that you're actually using the services, paying us for the services, and participating in our ecosystem. And on a monthly basis, that's a tremendous influence on the industry. But more importantly, it's an excellent opportunity for us to learn from you what it is you want next. When I joined the company in 2008, and that makes me an old timer in AWS terms, We were very small. We had just a couple services, literally, that we started off with. But now we're at a point where we're in 190 countries, and we're developing services at an incredible pace, representative of about 70 services operating right now, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those are and how those influence people's operations. But the most important thing here is constant innovation, because as you come up with new ways to use our services, new ways to combine things together to make your business more successful, it gives us an opportunity to find that undifferentiated heavy lifting, that part of your business that you really don't want to do, but you have to do because you have no choice, and find a way we can build a service that helps relieve you of that particular necessity of operations. One thing that's kind of entertaining about this industry is price reductions. We as an organization have reduced prices 52 times over the last few years, and it's pretty unusual when you look at a business that we take pride in the reduction in what we charge our customers, as opposed to ways to increase costs. We're looking now into a world that's a bit changing from the way traditional marketplaces operate. It used to be you had to go and buy software somewhere and then install it on a set of systems that you purchased as well. We now operate a marketplace with more than 100,000 customers in it at any given time, where you can buy software often by the hour, as opposed to buying a license for a period of time. And that's tremendously differentiating for some customers, especially small or medium businesses who may not want to plunk out the cash for a 3-year license for a piece of software just to try it out. There's a fantastic statement that's been made several times. There is no compression algorithm for experience. As an organization, you can't stand up and say, I'm going to be a cloud provider tomorrow, and then be successful at this. This is something you have to build the organizational capability to do over a long period of time. And it's something that we've had to invest in dramatically in order to make sure that we have the level of availability, reliability, and durability that you as a customer expect. The service breadth I also talked about already, but the pace of innovation is something that's absolutely incredible to be a part of. If you look in 2012, we launched about 60 new services or features in any given year. This year, we're over 700 to September, and we have our big series of launches coming up at reInvent this month. So it's something where you're going to see just this incredible upswing in new features and new services. Now that, of course, is a challenge to some people, because just keeping up with all the new capabilities takes a tremendous amount of effort, and it takes a tremendous amount of focus. For those of you who've worked with our account teams in the past, for example, one of the best ways that you can take advantage of new services and features is to talk to people like your solutions architects. They know what our new services are and how they can fit into your particular business, and they're there to help. Scale. Scale is something that's difficult to wrap your head around when you're in this industry. If you look at the way we operate, the scale in which we operate at, it's dramatic, and it's exemplified by some comments that have been made by some researchers out there. Gartner, for example, has said that S3, which is our storage service, our object store, holds about 1.6 times the number of objects in storage that our rest of our competitors put together handle. We also store trillions of objects on behalf of customers outside of the Amazon.com set of customers as well. And we regularly peak operations at millions of transactions per second. Gartner has also told us that customers, especially enterprise customers, are now saying that AWS is the way they want to do business. It's the kind of new normal for most enterprises. And that was something that's a little bit of a change in the way we think about things. AWS started off as an organization that really focused on the startup customer, because those customers are the ones who benefit the most from the incredible scalability, and I'll talk in a few minutes about some of those customers that we offer. But we found that enterprise customers benefit just as much from their use of AWS, principally because it allows their businesses to be more nimble over time. And none of us want to be in a business where we're stuck in one place. So the ability to change directions rapidly as our market changes, to change directions rapidly as our businesses grow around the planet, and to deploy to new regions around the world in a simple, easy fashion is tremendously important to our competitiveness as an organization. That innovation happens across multiple industries. If you look at the startup world, one of the fundamental components of a startup business, whether it be in food delivery or technology delivery, is finding financing. And Oak North Bank is a finance organization that focused on giving money to organizations who are startups. Somewhere in the 1 to 15 million pound range was where they're aiming their particular investments at. But they wanted to deliver that interface to their customers in a novel fashion as well. So they worked with us and the Financial Conduct Authority to completely construct their bank interface on AWS and to run their customer interactions and their backends all on AWS. So not only are they influencing the startup industry, we are providing the startup industry a way to operate successfully, but now we're completing that circle by allowing the financing portion of the startup world to operate successfully on the cloud. As Ian stated earlier, UK region is coming soon, which I hope is the end of this year. At the worst, it'll be the beginning of next year. But we're rolling out regions to a number of places around the world at the same time. You'll see another region appearing in Paris, coming out soon, in Ningxia in China, and you'll see other regions in North America as well. These regions are important constructs for us. As Ian said, a region is a part of our ecosystem that puts your data in one location in the planet, one geographical district. And within that, there are a series of availability zones that allow you to determine how many machines and how dispersed your data should be to provide for availability, durability of that information, and locality to your customer base. So locality is important for regulatory purposes, obviously. It's also important for performance reasons, because there are networks around the world that are better located in some areas. We choose those areas for our data centers to provide you a quick, easy access to your customer set as well. And those customers are people that you recognize. It's the startup world, and if you think up startup customers, you've got people like Gilt here, who's a high-end fashion retailer who's operating on AWS, or Go Squared, which does web analytics, or Air, which is a fintech organization. I'll talk a little bit more about them later on. The important thing here is low cost of entry in the beginning, rapid scalability as your business succeeds, but most important, the ability to try something. And if it succeeds, fantastic, you've got scale. If it doesn't succeed, your cost of failure is dramatically reduced because you don't have this big pile of servers sitting around that you're no longer using. Of course, some of the biggest names that you see on this list are ones that you probably recognize and use, whether it's like Shazam for music identification, or Zynga, who's probably one of the most successful gaming companies on the entire planet. What's a little bit different, though, is the number of enterprise customers who are using AWS. And this goes everything from dev and test on one end to all in on the other end. And it's businesses who are the biggest names in their industries. If it's oil and gas, for example, it's Shell or BP or Hess. If it's healthcare, it's Merck or Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson. Technology, of course, Netflix, Samsung, or Adobe. These are all examples where businesses have decided to move to AWS because it involves an agility enhancement for them or a dramatic change in their cost of doing business. Financial Times, for example, has told us that they reduced their cost of IT operations by 80% by moving into AWS because their workloads vary dramatically across the day as people view their articles, view their content, and they need to be able to flex up and down without a huge upfront capital investment. That same kind of flexibility is applicable to the public sector. If you look at Transport for London, for example, their usage changes across the day, goes up and down. By using a flexible service like AWS, they're allowed their business to flex up and down and their costs to be dramatically reduced. But more importantly, they can adjust to changes very rapidly. So as changes in traffic patterns happen because of labor issues or things like that, they can get that information out to their customers dramatically more easily. We have a list of about 2,000 government agencies who are using AWS, more than 5,000 academic institutions, and about 17,000 nonprofit organizations who benefit from using AWS. As Ian said, though, partners are one of the most important things that we have as a way of delivering service to customers, because many of our customers have told us that they need help in moving their IT operations. IT may not be their core business. It may just be something they have to do as part of their business. CloudReach, using them as an example, is a premier partner locally. They were born in the cloud, interestingly, in 2009, and are one who's got a significant amount of effort put into the certification and accreditation process. They're also one who's done a very good job about sustaining the performance and service quality for their customers. They are all in on the cloud environment. They're not somebody who's dealing with legacy systems. It's all about operating their infrastructure completely in AWS. Talent is another example. They're particularly focused on cloud integration, but performant big data operations is their specialty. And they've decided to become specialists in operating things like Amazon Redshift or Elastic MapReduce or a simple storage service. So they're another example of people who are part of the Amazon Partner Network who've been very effective about moving their business to operating on AWS and using AWS to help their customers. System integrators, of course, are the stock in trade for many companies. We have system integrators, of course, like Clarinet Bastion or CloudReach, KCOM, or DataPipe, who are all represented here today, I'm pretty sure, and are ones who can help customers when they need particular sets of technical expertise, the ability to move their information or systems into the cloud. And of course, you've got the big names that you'd expect to see, like Accenture, Booz Allen, Cognizant, or Infosys. And these are often people who are being used by our customers today in their existing legacy infrastructures. And the fact that they have the ability to move into AWS means that that transition can be much easier and much more straightforward. Software on AWS is often the same software you're used to using in your on-premises installation. And that's an important point, because one of the concerns that customers have is, do they have to relearn how to operate their business? Do they have to completely shift the way they're operating? The answer is no. You don't have to if you don't want to. You can use something from Oracle or Adobe, Acquia or Autodesk in AWS the same way that you use it in your on-premises environment, with a little bit of a twist. Sometimes you can use those software packages using a by-the-hour pricing model, as opposed to the big upfront cost that you're used to. The most important part about that, though, is that you can transition the same workload from an on-premises place to AWS and use it without changing your operations. Then you can decide, do you want to optimize your operations by moving away from a database like MySQL and moving to something like Amazon Aurora, which allows us to operate the database heavy lifting portion on your behalf. Near and dear to my heart, security solutions in the AWS marketplace. This is an area that we've spent a lot of effort here. Many of our customers have told us that their security implementation in their on-premises environment is critical to their operations, not only from a security perspective, but also because they're a regulated industry. And their regulatory environment requires them to be able to adhere to a set of rules around how they protect customer information, how they can report on it, how they can alarm on it, et cetera. So the fact that you can use the same security software and hardware that you use on premises in AWS is tremendously powerful for people. For example, if you're using Trend Micro's Deep Security on premises, you can also use it in the cloud. If you're using Splunk to do log analytics on premises, you can use it in the cloud the same way. And that extends all the way down the various layers, data protection from people like Gemalto or Vormetric. And again, many of these solutions are available by the drink, by the hour, in the AWS marketplace. How do we protect information in AWS? How do we convey the information about how we do business to customers? It's all about certification and accreditation, and that's expressed through compliance standards. If you look at us as a business, one of the most important things we do is scale every day. We also have to scale the conversation with customers about how we protect their information, and the compliance process is how we do that. Many of our customers require compliance certifications to operate, the same as we do, whether it's ISO 27001 or quality standards like ISO 9001, or more recent standards like ISO 27017, which is about security in the cloud, or ISO 27018, which is about protection of private data, PII, personally identifiable information, in the cloud. The important thing here is that we operate many of these controls on behalf of our customers so that they don't have to. If we operate the controls for you, we're audited by an independent auditing firm, in this case E&Y, and reported out through a series of certifications to you. That's work that you don't have to do in the security realm. And that's formally accepted by a number of authorities in different regulated areas, whether you're hosting private information in China and it's subject to the MLPS, or whether you're hosting healthcare information in many different jurisdictions around the world. You can run that workload on AWS successfully, leveraging our certification and accreditation. As a result of our ability to help them secure their information, many companies have decided their best bet is to move all in to the cloud. So for example, you have companies like Kempinski, who's moved their entire reservation and operations systems for all of their hotels worldwide into AWS, which means all of that data about who's visiting where and what payment instruments they're using, et cetera, is running on the cloud. Or Intuit. Intuit's TurboTax platform processes about 18 million tax returns every single year. All of that data, of course, has to be secured appropriately, and they run TurboTax on AWS. Netflix, you're all used to that. That's the sort of the biggest example of cloud-native applications. Anytime you watch a movie, that information is operated on, stored in, by AWS. ICAP is an interesting one. They're a UK-based inter-dealer trade settlement organization. So they provide post-trade risk services between traders around the world, transactions typically on behalf of institutional clients. They decided for their business to be successful, given the margins that they're operating with, they had to move to the cloud for savings purposes, but also for agility purposes. It allows them to release new features to their member traders much more rapidly than they could on premises, and allows them to be more competitive as a result in the industry that is incredibly competitive by nature. What I'd talk about this morning, though, is more about democratization of security, and it's about the patterns that we see in how security is changing in the cloud itself. And change is something that we think is good, and it's something that drives benefit in business. This is a quote from the Fourth Industrial Revolution, what it means and how to respond, from the World Economic Forum, but I think it's relevant to the security industry and the IT world as well, because businesses are being forced to change. This is not something that people want to do in many cases, but because the demographics of the world are changing, because the interests of our customer bases are changing, we as organizations must change in order to survive. The first megatrend that I want to talk about is about speed of innovation. And it used to be a discussion where people would say, I can either move quickly or I can be secure, but I can't be both. And I think that's a false choice. I think that when properly implemented, you can both move rapidly on the cloud and be at least as secure as you were on premises. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the at least as secure in a moment. Most importantly for many of our customers now, that what business decisions used to take months to achieve now take hours or minutes. And we can help them achieve that more successfully than they could before. Human Recognition Systems is an interesting organization focused on access control platforms, on workforce management and that sort of thing. They operate things like the access control system and badging at Gatwick Airport. And they needed to move their organization into AWS for scale reasons, because many of their customers have very significant fluctuations in the use of their services. For example, the travel industry, as many of you probably know, experiences dramatic swings around holiday seasons. And as a result, they have to be able to accommodate vast numbers of additional workers for short periods of time and then scale back down as that industry shrinks. Doing so with personally identifiable information and access control information to sensitive airports around the world means that they had to build on top of the security of AWS. And building on top of security is something that we can help customers with quite a bit. So if you're a customer whose business requires you to process transactions using credit cards, for example, we have a number of templates that allow you to do that more successfully. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but PCI DSS, which is the standard around the acceptance of credit cards around the world, requires a certain set of controls. Since we built these controls into templates, it's much easier for customers to leverage our platform to successfully take credit card transactions themselves. There's a great story of a French startup who wanted to do payments transaction processing on behalf of merchant retailers in France. And I was talking to them last week, and they said that they have 6 people in their organization. And when they went to the PCI assessor, who's going to do the work in examining their infrastructure for sufficiency, PCI assessors, by the way, are required to audit a card acceptance regime before they can start transaction processing. The assessor said, well, how big is your organization? They said 6 people. And the assessor said, sorry, you're never going to get through this. Let's just stop right here. They said, oh, but we're running on AWS. And the assessor actually came back and said, oh, well, okay, let's keep going then. Because they understood that we did so much of the heavy lifting on behalf of the customers already that the customer could operate with a reduced workforce. Air is an interesting sort of local example here about the way that people are using financial services effectively to evaluate whether people should have access to credit. And AIR is one of those organizations that does an enormous amount of processing of data about the financial readiness of individuals to take on loans or debt. AIR does so by doing a number of analyses using things like Monte Carlo simulations. For example, what happens if the market does these things to someone's ability to manage debt? And they couldn't do that with the kind of on-premises infrastructure that they were used to, principally because it was just too expensive in order to meet the margin requirements that they had as a business. And so they get into a position where, by operating on AWS, they can take better risk decisions about individual customers and help their consumers do the same thing on the other end. So it's allowing a startup to create and track and manage their operations in AWS successfully in a very quickly changing world. The next major trend is removal of constraints. If you think about information technology, and those of us who've been in the industry for a while have heard this saw over and over again, information technology was supposed to change the world and make everything easier. And it's arguable about whether information technology in the 80s and 90s actually improved business or whether it just created a new set of problems for us to deal with. Information technology has always been something that's sort of both a benefit and a detriment. Information inside an organization is the organization's lifeblood. The really important piece about it is the ability to use that information in a meaningful way with appropriate rapidity. The more easily, the more quickly you can access information, the more effective your business decisions are. And I think removal of constraints around business access to data, but business to access to data securely, is a big differentiator in operations. It allows you to unbound the creativity of your developers. And you'll have a couple customers come up in a few minutes talking about how their developers can operate more efficiently in AWS because of the removal of constraints. British Gas operates a series of connected home or Internet of Things systems, including one called Hive, which many of you may be customers of. It allows them to monitor their customers' home and understand how they're using energy, and to help them use energy more wisely, to save money, and to reduce our carbon footprint in the environment. They couldn't do so unless they could collect all of this data from sensors around the UK and bring it back and analyze it more effectively. They told us that when they started off, they had an in-house data center where they were doing this work, and that scaled up to about 10,000 users. But beyond that, it broke. And obviously, they're much larger than that now. And they needed to move to AWS to handle that scale. But it also, the movement to AWS allowed them to be more effective about implementing security controls to assure themselves that collecting data from all of those people's homes was handled appropriately and safely. It allowed them to update their systems more flexibly and to respond to security threats more rapidly. Now, all of you have heard about a company called ARM. It's probably the biggest tech company in the UK. Here to talk about how ARM uses AWS to unbound the creativity of their developers is Ollie Stevens.
Hello. As Stephen said, I'm Ollie Stevens. I work just up the road here in Cambridge, which is the headquarters of ARM. Hopefully ARM needs a little introduction these days. We've been around for 25 years. It seems like a long time. But what we've done in that period, we've been busy. We've established a very dominant architecture, partnership, and ecosystem that's helping to engage and enable the current transformation of our lives by technology. Everybody knows that ARM sort of won the battle to the mobile phone and dominates that marketplace. But probably outside of that, what people may or may not know is that it really covers everything from the IoT space on the left. And I apologize, this doesn't work. There's lots of little pictures in this cloud normally, but they're not projecting very well. From that IoT space all the way through to servers. And things like household appliances and network infrastructure, and all of that fabric is, very much the area that we play in. Amazon themselves, we're very proud to have Amazon as a partner of ours through the acquisition of Annapurna that happened 18 months ago, and through that they have chips in the networking and fabric space that probably are contributing towards the making AWS a better environment for you. I'm sure they are. This 1 trillion quote here is from Masa-san. He's the CEO of SoftBank. SoftBank, in September of this year, acquired Arm, and we're very proud to be part of their family now. And his vision is that in the next 20 years, 1 trillion connected devices will be on the internet. And it's that vision that is sort of driving our development and fueling all of our plans, because it requires both a hardware and a software solution that spans the complete gamut of modern technology, from the sensor to the cloud. So as I said, I'm the lead architect of our internal platform. So it's my job to make sure that our internal engineers have got what they need to make this happen. We're a relatively small company, about 5,000 employees. Probably about 4,000 of those are engineers, or call themselves engineers. But we have a lot of engineering disciplines. So starting off on the left-hand side, a lot of software engineering takes place in Arm that enables the ecosystem. Everything from building and developing cloud services like Embed, through to people who are performance optimizing an Android, booting on a model of a processor that won't hit market for another 3 years. It's very varied amount of software engineering going on. In the middle, hardware engineering, the bit that we're known for. So CPUs and GPUs and interconnects and all that sort of stuff. The key for our hardware engineers really is a scalability one. It takes an enormous amount of CPU and hours of simulations in order to verify what is probably a very few milliseconds on a live chip that actually doing the right thing. And that obviously is scaling to cope with the demand of the business. We run very large scale, high throughput clusters of compute in internal data centers in order to try and keep pace with that demand. And then on the right-hand side here are my physical users. So when we talk about hardware, we tend to talk about the people, the act of designing the processors and the chips. But there's a whole nother piece of work that is needed to take those designs and make sure that they're viable in silicon. And that includes building cell libraries and memories and all those sorts of things. And those are that's the physical space. This also involves a lot of high throughput compute cycles. So they have that same scalability issue that the hardware colleagues do. But they also have a burstability problem. So typically what happens is a customer might come to us and say, okay, we've got this cell library from you, but we're trying to make a part that needs to run at 200 degrees Celsius because we've got to put it right inside an engine. And the cell library that you gave us is not characterized to run at that temperature, so can you recharacterize it for us? And we're like, yeah, sure, that's fine. But that's an enormous amount of CPU, and that's a piece of work that we, yesterday didn't know we were going to need to do, and today we do. So that leads to sort of high levels of demand on our compute and our storage that are impossible to predict. So we do largely run in-house today, but AWS is providing us with some compelling opportunities of how we can do some things differently and how we might do more things differently in the future. So I'm not going to talk about the software engineers and their agility issues. Everybody knows that's a solved problem. Cloud native and SaaS solutions abound these days, and it's a really healthy situation, thanks to platforms such as AWS enabling it. And we just go out and pick and choose what we want. But for scalability, we really have an opportunity now, provided by AWS, to think about how we grow. So many of you will know the story that I'm trying to tell in those pictures on the left-hand side, right? Some few years ago, you go through a big project to commission a new data center. You look at the growth predictions in terms of how much you're going to need to put in there over the next 7 years, because that's probably what the sort of investment cycle we're looking at for that. You think, okay, that's a lot of growth, but I don't believe it, so I'm going to add 50% maybe to cope with these things. And you build this massive, great big data center, and you high-five each other and say, right, we're sorted now. But of course, what happens is growth exceeds the predictions, and sooner or later you find yourself with two challenges. One, I can't fit what I need in anymore. What do I do now? And the other one is, I can't fit what I need in, and I'm running a load of legacy stuff that isn't as good as the stuff that I could get right now, but we haven't fully depreciated it, so our finance people won't let us swap it out, and all these sorts of challenges that come with internal data centers. And, those sorts of discussions, everybody looks longingly at the cloud and says, well, there's the solution. We'll just go and get some of that. And plug it in somehow. And those sorts of conversations are interesting. The economics around that model of using persistent instances because we run 24/7, high throughput compute, there aren't those obvious ATX savings that you might get by transforming the way you do stuff. But it's still worth pursuing. There's definitely the right way to go, and it is definitely the best solution in the long term. Burstability is easier, right? Because yesterday we didn't have the demand, today we do, and in 2 weeks' time that job will be done, and we won't need that anymore. And we're lucky sometimes that request comes along and we happen to have spare capacity internally. But more and more often that's not the case, because we're down in this situation here, we're full, and we need to look at bursting out. And we've been using CFN cluster in AWS for this. So we can spin up and run a custom little high throughput cluster designed specifically around the task that it needs to do. We can make it feel similar enough to our internal environment so that the porting effort is minimal. Again, we use CFN cluster because it gives us that high throughput batch engine as part of the solution. And it's just a Cloud Forms recipe that plugs all the relevant bits together for us. We can build it in a way so that it'll auto scale. So as the engineers release the work into the system, it will scale up. We can use Spot Fleet to add large amounts of resource to it quickly at very cheap costs. And when everything's done, we tear it down and we move on. And importantly, every cent that we spend on it is tagged against that particular project, so we can provide clear accounting information back to the business so they understand the cost. And then finally, over on the right-hand side there, didn't mention it on the previous slide, but we have another little challenge, which for non-functionals I'll call deliverability. So that little exercise that we went through to produce a new cell library for a customer, say, has probably left us with a 5 terabyte data set that needs to get to the customer. It's roughly the order of what a cell library is these days. They only get, as the process technologies shrink, the data sets get bigger. So it's only going to get bigger over time. And we've experienced pain and multiple days of headaches in trying to get that data from our environment to our customer's environment, effectively over the internet, down our wet piece of string into their wet piece of string. And customers rightly are a little bit annoyed because we completed the work, we recognise the revenue, and then they don't actually get it for multiple days. So we've been exploring how we can exploit AWS to better do this. We can shift it up into S3 easily enough, and we can put a big fat pipe in between us and Amazon easily enough so that we can get the data into there. And then we can exploit the backbone of AWS through CloudFront and the security of AWS through signed URLs to allow the customer to fetch it down from there. And then if the customer is still struggling to get that amount of data down his wet piece of string, he just has to bump his connection with Amazon up, which is a much more compelling story for him than trying to bump the point-to-point connection with us. And the faster his connection to Amazon is, the better he'll be able to suck that thing down. So that's another interesting use. Basically piggybacking on someone else's backbone because it's better than ours. Okay, finally, I just wanted to briefly touch on my favorite aspect of the AWS offerings, and that's the way they allow me to challenge the status quo when I'm talking to the flow engineers, to the service ops guys, to the business. And two areas in particular. So that top line, for years, we've worked really hard over the last sort of 20 years to improve our internal compute platform. Which, for the sake of operational efficiency, is a multi-tenant, multitask environment with large NAS systems and, extreme combined I/O throughput and all of these sorts of things. And when we talk to the flow owners, who typically have only ever experienced that sort of an environment, they're very reluctant to believe that we can achieve the same through the cloud. They say, oh, you won't get the I/O performance that we need. You won't be able to, the scalability. We don't want to run on virtual machines. We like physical hardwares. We don't want to lose the smallest iota of performance. And the same goes for some of the folk who run our internal estate. They're so invested in making it fit for purpose that they're somewhat blind to the opportunities of refactoring some of this work and porting it over into a different world. And for me, it's just the big difference between running a multitask, multi-tenancy environment internally versus splitting it up and running it as a set of single task, single tenancy jobs in a dynamic environment like AWS. And it takes a lot of education and a lot of demonstration to point out to people that you can achieve exactly the same throughput, if not better, with all the added advantages of scalability and things, if you just go through that effort. And then this bottom equation here. So this is my spot pricing scenario equation. And the story kind of goes like this. An engineer has a contract with me as the compute provider to do some stuff. So she has a set of tasks that she needs to complete. She has a deadline by which those tasks need to complete. And essentially, she has a pot of money. She doesn't realize it right now, but she has a pot of money to do that. So if you take a scenario, let's say it's an overnight soak of a CPU. So the test bench is ready, the set of tests that need to run are there. The deadline is sort of 8 a.m. tomorrow morning because that's when she's going to be back in the office to look at the results. And the pot of money is essentially the internal allocation that we've allowed that task within our estate to do. If you translate that into what the operational cost of that's the pot of money. So if I now go to her and say, okay, well, we could run this in AWS, and we could exploit spot pricing, we could build up an environment, run it there, tear it down. I can meet that guarantee. I can guarantee you that by 8 o'clock in the morning, I will have completed that set of tests for you, no problem. But I may have been able to do it for less money. So if I was able to do it for less money because I was able to exploit spot pricing or something like that, then what do I do with that extra money? What do you want? Do you want me to try and complete that work earlier? Because I can probably do that. I'll spend a bit more of that budget and get it done earlier. Maybe not, because if it completes at 2 in the morning, so what? As long as it's complete by 8, that's not attractive. Do you want me to give that money back to you so that you can bank it, and that might help de-risk your project later down when actually you've got more to do and there's more tests that you need to run and you may be running out of time? You've got that extra money that you didn't spend now to do. Or maybe you just want to give me a stretch goal. So you've got this set of tests that I must do, and I guarantee I will do those in time. But if I've got spare resource and I've got spare money, then there's another set of tests that I could do. And this conversation, above all the others that I have with either the people writing the flows that run or the people who are operating the flows to get the work done, is the one where the sort of light bulb moment occurs and they finally grasp the potentials of this sort of dynamic model and what it might do and how it might change their world and their approach to verifying a chip. So this conversation, above all others that I have in this subject, is by far my favorite. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. One of my favorite conversations to have with customers is about the piece that Ali mentioned in the bottom left-hand corner of one of his slides, where they're constrained in how they think about things because of what exists in their on-premises data center. And Ali said, well, maybe it's not the newest versions of specific machines that are available to me, or maybe it's a different set of platforms that I can get elsewhere. And one of the things that we are very, very good at is announcing and launching new types of virtual machines for our customers. We recently announced X1 instances. X1s are memory-intensive instances, so 2 terabytes of memory available in a single machine. If you're running an SAP HANA node, for example, being able to do all of the in-memory computation that database requires is critically important. Or if you're running something that requires like Apache Spark, for example, to do analytics. Interesting point here. Every single morning, my team runs a big data analytics process where we analyze the use of AWS by our employees to ensure they're doing so in a fashion we expect. For example, we collect all of the process executions by our staff when they are operating on systems that contain customer data, because we want to ensure that they're doing only things that we expect. And we analyze those to report on anybody who uses privileges above their norm. If they escalate to root, for example, to do a particular action, we want to report on that to our leadership. So every morning I get a list of every human who took a privileged action on systems that are associated with Amazon EC2. The fact that I can get that in an email and read it on my phone gives you an idea on how few that number is. But we couldn't do that analytics without very large-scale processing. It used to be things that we had to do on thousands of nodes. Literally every morning we'd spin up a 1,200-node Hadoop cluster. With the X1s, we can reduce that by doing more of the analytics in memory on individual machines. Similarly, we also announced a set of machines called P2s. These are heavy GPU-intensive instances, up to 16 NVIDIA Tesla K80 GPUs in one machine. If you look at the performance of this machine compared to what supercomputers of just a few years ago looked like, it's dramatic. I mean, the ability of an average individual to go and rent the equivalent of a supercomputer using a credit card is dramatic enhancement to the ability to do business in some space. And it's one that's kind of entertaining. I mean, 20 gigabits of aggregate network throughput, 16 CPUs, that's 40,000 parallel processing cores in one machine. If you're a programmer, what can you do with that? I mean, just amazing analytics that were never possible before. Okay, we talked about making things more interesting and more compelling to the average user of our services. Let's talk about the other direction, simplification. Simplification in the security world is something that I believe is the most important thing we can do. An example there, if you think about access to customer data, it's something that we are incredibly paranoid about. And so we decided to take some very specific rules about how we deal with things like the hard disks that are in our data centers. Simple rules are easiest to understand by our staff, they're the easiest to enforce, and they're the easiest to audit against. So rather than saying the rule is that customer data on disk can't leave our data centers, so you have to check and see if there was ever customer data on this disk before this disk can go out, we decided it was much more straightforward and frankly much more enforceable if we said no hard disk may leave our data centers intact, period. It's very easy for our staff to enforce. A guard says that is a hard disk, it may not go out, as opposed to having to follow this flow chart to determine whether or not there's data on it. And it's something that we can enforce very straightforwardly with mechanisms. We have magnetometers on our data center entry points, not on the way in, but instead on the way out, to determine if our staff have any storage material with them. So it's a way to ensure that we protect customer data appropriately, but it's also representative of the way I think security controls should be represented everywhere in the cloud. Holiday Extras is a company that uses our services to provide interesting things like hotel bookings and currency exchange. insurance and airport parking to their customers, that they told us one of the reasons that they moved to AWS was because it was very straightforward for their staff to use our services securely. It was straightforward for them to integrate their on-premises directory infrastructure with ours, and allowed them to then enforce controls on their staff on who had access to what data, where, and how. They use EC2 and S3, VPCs and Glacier for storage, and it allows them to put controls on individual staff so that they have access only to their data which is necessary for them to do their job. If you go into your on-premises data center right now, the human beings who are in that facility, how many of them have admin or root rights to the machines that are in there? The answer is in most corporate data centers, all of them. And the answer in most corporate data centers is they have access to all of the machines. If you walk into one of my data centers, the data techs, the people who can physically touch the hardware, have no logical access to that machine. We separate duties. If you're a human who can touch the machines, you may not have logical access. The inverse is also true. So if you're a service team owner who has logical access to our infrastructure, you are not permitted physical access to the infrastructure. It makes it harder to compromise people who have access to data and to exfiltrate that data if you separate those job responsibilities. Defining trust boundaries. We're all familiar with the notion of a firewall. My opinion, perimeter defense is dead. It's necessary to reduce noise, but it's not a sufficient security control. And the reduction of trust boundaries is something that we push constantly. The ability of a customer to set up a rule that says something like the only person who can access this data object is Tom, and it's only between the hours of 9 and 5, Monday through Friday, when he's at his desktop, and only when he has a multi-factor authentication token in his hand. Some people say, well, that's absurd. Why do you need that level of control? Well, if you're in a regulated industry where you're processing stock trading, you're required by law to keep that trade record for a certain period of time, and only a certain individual may delete those records when that time retention interval has expired. So you need to have that ability to control data to that level. That's something you'll see across many of our services, the ability to push down controls to very, very small boundaries, and to allow your individuals, your corporate citizens, access to the data and resources that's required to do their job, but none other. If you're on the EC2 team, for example, in our organization, you can have access to those hosts that are necessary for you to do your job, but you will never have access to hosts of the S3 team. So you can't get to the storage plant. Similarly, the people who are operating our relational database service will not have access to the storage infrastructure either. And that reduces blast radius. It shrinks the boundaries around people, and people are the #1 cause of mistakes. Which leads to my next discussion. It's about automation. Automation in security is one of the most effective controls that you can put in place. One of the things that I did this year, for example, was to set a series of goals to all of our service team staff about the reduction of human access to data. Our business is growing dramatically. It's more than doubling. And at the same time, I set a goal that we aggressively reduce the number of staff who have access to data. The number, just to give you rough ideas here, is about 80%, 80. Even as our business is doubling, I want an 80% reduction in staff access to information. Why is that? Because people make mistakes. People's credentials get compromised. People make errors. And this is one of those wonderful intersections between security and operational availability. If you ask an operations specialist, they hate it when people are touching systems because people type the wrong thing at the keyboard. They make a mistake. You know, who's ever typed RM minus RF star and gone, oh no, afterward? It's really tough to get stuff back from dev null, folks. So if you automate actions that humans normally undertake, you reduce the chance of error, which makes the operations people happier because you get better availability and uptime. So get the people away from the data. Talking about automation, obviously, is something that's really near and dear to the heart of many of our customers. And I'd like to welcome to the stage James Thompson, who's the chief architect of the Met Office, to talk about how the Met Office has moved part of their infrastructure to AWS and automated in doing so.
Cool, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name's James Tompkins. I'm the Chief Enterprise Architect at the Met Office. Hopefully most of you have heard of the Met Office. It's the nation's favourite weather forecaster. We've also been around for about 150 years, predominantly as part of the MOD, but more recently as part of the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Perhaps what less of you may know is the diverse range of services we provide beyond what you see on the television or hear on the radio. Almost any activity you can think of is affected by the weather in some way, and the Met Office provide a wide range of services into industries such as defence, energy, transport, civil contingency and aviation, amongst many more. And the majority of these services are delivered 24/7, 365. Underpinning these services are some pretty big numbers. Every day at the Met Office, we collect over 300 million observations from observing networks around the globe. We use those observations in order to perform over 20 quadrillion calculations on one of the world's largest supercomputers in order to generate over 4 million forecasts. These forecasts underpin the majority of the services we provide, including a public website that on a peak weather day can account for over 20% of all government website traffic. Advances in connectivity, computational power, and the desire to improve forecast accuracy means these numbers are only going to get bigger. Along with the increase in data, we've seen an increase in appetite for the data. High-profile extreme weather events builds an appreciation of the impact that weather has on people's prosperity and well-being. This has moved weather data away from the sphere of a few specialists into the heart of decision-making for businesses and government. This, combined with an increase in the way people wish to consume the data across a range of devices, presents a real challenge to some of the legacy delivery systems underpinning our services. About 18 months ago, we took the decision to migrate a number of our FTP-based push services to pull-based data APIs. This fundamentally changed the nature of some of the characteristics of the services we were providing, placing a much greater emphasis on service availability and service scalability as our customers came to consume the data on demand. The need to provide highly scalable access in a cost-effective manner seemed a good match for the capabilities provided by AWS Public Cloud. However, it fundamentally changed the technology capabilities that we needed to help deliver those services. In responding to that challenge, we took two significant decisions. The first was to engage a strategic partner, CloudReach, in order to accelerate our ability to develop those capabilities. They also helped us to explore the unknown unknowns of movement into the cloud and provide early life operational support. The other significant decision we took was to leverage the power of the Amazon platform. At the outset, there was some concern over the idea of being locked into the Amazon platform. However, we believe the benefits of being able to avoid nugatory development effort and the architectural benefits of using pre-existing services significantly outweighed this risk. We're now 12 months into our cloud journey, and we have operational APIs underpinning our mobile applications. I'd say the biggest benefit we've seen so far in our use of AWS has been the speed of delivery at almost every stage of development. From the very outset, our developers were able to access environments and infrastructure that enabled them to fail fast and fail cheaply, and innovate services in a way that just wouldn't have been possible on-premise. Our ability to deliver infrastructure as code has also enabled us to automate almost every part of our service delivery. This has provided a real step change in our ability to scale, test, and monitor our services. One example of this was during development where we were able to stand up like-for-like services only with different storage backends, one of which was DynamoDB and one was Elasticache backed by Redis. We're able to replay the same workload against both of those services and profile the performance and cost characteristics of those services in order to make the most informed choice possible about what the correct storage backend was for our services. Over the next 12 months, we'll be looking to mature the capabilities we've developed so far. This includes developing our own internal cloud ops team in order to take over from some of the operational support that we outsourced in the early days. We also didn't do any upfront cost optimization for our services, so we're keen to explore the use of reserved instances and exploit the spot market, as well as rapidly maturing serverless architectures. One aspect of AWS that we're hoping to use internally is taking some of the security best practices and using them on our on-premise infrastructure. As we move more and more of our services and our operational data APIs into the cloud, We're also looking to explore and enhance our connectivity arrangements through Amazon Direct Connect. And finally, we have quite a direct relationship with both Amazon and CloudReach. And I just want to shout out to the public sector team, our account manager and solutions architect, who've been really helpful in supporting us throughout the process. Thanks very much.
Thank you, James. Automation is something that should not only take place in your business itself, but in the process of security in your organization. Automating security operations gives you two benefits. First of all, it's a repetitive, successful process where you do the same thing over and over and over, which has benefits in terms of enforcing particular behaviors across your user base. The number of times where there's been a security problem and the customer said, well, we forgot to do something is far too many. The process of automation allows you to build up that institutional knowledge, enshrine it into code, and then use it repeatedly across your organization. Security operations automation should focus first around design. How do you build your infrastructure successfully? Then how do you test that to ensure your design is consistent with your goals, with any requirements you have from regulatory bodies, et cetera? And then package that resultant up, constrain who has access to that resultant package, deploy it in a fashion that's uniform and consistent, and then monitor the behavior of your operations. And as you can see, we've given you services which help in each of these circumstances. So when you design something that you like, use a CloudFormation template as a way to take that design, memorialize it in code, and use it repeatedly across your organization. You can use our service catalog, for example, to ensure that that design is available to all of your customers. And in some organizations, it may be the only suitable design that's allowed within a particular highly regulated environment. When you have that design and it's functioning in code, you want to test it. You want to test it every time you make a change. So services like Amazon Inspector, which I'll talk about more in a moment, allow you to do continuous security testing to go along with your continuous development model. You package all that information up into everything from an application that gets deployed on a virtual machine, an instance, or into a container that you use a container service with. And then the monitoring at the other end, CloudTrail, is critically important. This is one thing, if I can leave any security professional in the audience with a takeaway, if you are not using CloudTrail, please do. It gives you a record of every single action taken using your API credentials on AWS. That includes, by the way, actions that our back end takes on your behalf. So for example, if you start up a relational database service instance, an RDS instance, you will see the actions that our control plane takes on your behalf in standing up that virtual machine, in setting up firewall rules associated with it, and attaching it to your VPC. So you get not only your actions, but you get the actions of AWS on your behalf as well. Automation of security. If you have not tried Lambda, which is a serverless code execution facility, do so. Lambda is one of the coolest things that we've had from a long time in the security world. There's a really interesting example. It's a video available on YouTube by one of my engineers named Don Bailey, where he demonstrates the use of AWS config rules and Lambda to take actions in response to security threats. So one of the things that he wanted to demonstrate, for example, was if one of your staff members makes a change to a firewall rule that you don't approve of, revert that change immediately. So he set up a series of triggers to do this, but he found that config rules and Lambda reacted so quickly, he actually had to put some sleep cycles into the demo because he couldn't switch screens to record the change fast enough. The point there is you're no longer requiring security operations personnel to take action to prevent problems. You can use the infrastructure itself to help you automate security operations. Don't reinvent the wheel. As people learn on our infrastructure and we build new services, our customers get to take advantage of those. You don't have to be the one going the journey alone. You can take advantage of the fact, for example, if you're a small customer, that Shell or HSBC has required us to set the security bar this high. You don't have to push us to do that. That's something that's really freeing for a lot of customers. For example, my son's in university, and he uses our services to do his computer science work. He uses our free tier because he's under the limits there to do that work. But he has exactly the same security tools available to him that British Petroleum does, BP. If you're a small business, you have a few people doing IT work, isn't it wonderful to have the ability of a large security professional contingent like we have at AWS on your side, building you services and tools? I want to ask another customer to come up to the stage. Direct Line is the UK's leading direct car insurer. There are about 13,000 car insurance quotes a day, I believe. And they sell a policy approximately every 10 seconds or so using AWS to provide service to their customers. They were established in 1985, and I think they have about 10,000 staff today. So it's a fairly substantial organization who's using AWS to deliver directly to their customers. I want to welcome Ash Roos, the director of Digital and Direct Line Group, who's going to talk to us about how they use AWS.
Hi there. So my name's Ash. You probably gathered that. And I work for Direct Line Group. We are one of the UK's largest general insurers. A lot of you probably have policies with us across our different brands. So whether it's Direct Line, Churchill, Privilege, or even Green Flag. And we cover things like motor, home, and also things like breakdown insurance. We've also got a load of brand partners that we work with, so providing insurance under their own brands. The company has around 8 million enforced policies, and also it goes without saying is the fact that we operate within a regulated environment, which makes things a little bit different. So where does AWS come in for us? Well, one of the key things that we are trying to do, like many organizations in many industries, is we want to become faster and we want to become more innovative. So the word fast is used in many different guises. For us at Direct Line Group, we believe that we're already fast, we just want to get faster, so things like agility. And when it comes to innovation, we don't believe innovation is something that sits in a department. We believe it happens across the organization, so we can make sure that the things that we provide to customers are great, but also the way we work is constantly improved. So that's the challenge that we're facing. Now, there are 4 kind of components to this. And whatever language you use, they're kind of common. You want to make your tech get better. You want to change the skills and structure of the organization. You want to look at how you work. And also, you want to change the mindset and the culture of the people within it. So when we started looking at how can AWS help, the focus was on tech, because that's where we thought the right place to start. So we've done quite a few things this year. Without going into the detail of how to influence an organization, because I think that's something that all of us have our different experiences of and are going through it. One of the key things I'd call out is the fact that how important it is that actually it's not just a top-down influence in terms of seniority. What's really important is having people within the organization that get it and understanding it, who are resilient and persistent, actually trying to influence across the organization how and why it's so great to use AWS. And there's a guy called Craig in the audience somewhere who's one of those people that has actually spent the last year working with tech teams and other risk and security teams to actually help influence them. And that's one of my key call-outs, really, because we sometimes assume it's always a top-down decision. But actually what we've done is we moved a lot of things. We were in development and test environments, and this year we moved into production with some stuff. It's still growing in terms of the things we're looking at. So whether it's FAQs, we've got a Direct Line for Business site, and also our Green Flag site. They've all moved into Amazon in pretty much quick succession over the last few months. And that's been pretty good because it's shown actually how the organization is really starting to adopt it and understand the benefit it can have in certain areas. So why is it good? Now, I think I was listening to all the other presentations, and I think it goes without saying, I think there's a common theme here. It's cost effective. It makes you faster. And one of the key things when you're in a regulated industry as well is that you want to make sure it's safe, and we believe it's just as safe as the previous implementation that we had, which is fantastic. So it enables us to start to drive this kind of faster and more innovative type of organization. But the other part, and this is the bit that I've learned most, I'm not as technically astute as most of you in the room. I'm a digital guy, which means I kind of sit across lots of different things in my head. And the bit that I've observed most is that actually it's how AWS is a catalyst for organizational change. So by implementing it, actually it started to help support some of the other things that I've mentioned. So going back to the fore and going into where we're going forward with this in Direct Line Group, we will put more things into the environment, into AWS, into a production environment where we see fit. So we'll tick the tech box. But actually, it's much more about how we can help influence the organization to become faster and more innovative. So if you start with the skills and structure. From a skills and structure perspective, if you look at the way AWS encourages you to use roles like DevOps, so it's merging two roles, or the fact that the interface is pretty intuitive. It's one of those things that, to teach your mum and dad probably would be a lot easier than if you were to ask them to do it in a traditional way. If you also look at the way that actually it changes the roles, so in terms of accountabilities, in terms of infrastructure, actually we've seen that actually in terms of a world of where your marketing department or basically your finance department or even your HR department, they could be involved in spinning up a server. So we've started to see how that's changing the organization, and we're trying to experiment and understand where that could be beneficial to the organization. Again, getting more fleet of foot, faster and more innovative. The second is much more around the ways of working. So if you were basically responsive and adaptive to the market, it's if you look at what AWS does in the fact that it takes 8 clicks to set up a server compared to the previous processes that we would have and I'm sure this is familiar, where you'd have to fill in a form and you'd go and speak to someone and you have an SLA and something might happen. We all know that. Actually, yes, that's good in terms of just generic speed, but actually what it's good is it changes all of the support mechanisms around it. How the person that's requesting something actually has to respond quicker because the actual activity happens much faster. And whether it's things like continuous delivery, or even in terms of the fact that you can set up automated rules, it's going to change the speed in which the organization can run. And we're used to being in organizations where actually change is pretty, you know the cycles. It could be monthly, quarterly, weekly. But if you get to a continuous delivery stage, the whole organization is going to change its pace. And it could even be your budget cycles start to have to change because the organization is changing its speed. And then the culture one, which is the most important one for me in terms of making a change to the organization, is very much around if you want an experimentation type of mindset and people to fail fast, we know the language, but you want to encourage that. Actually, Amazon's that kind of safe place to go because you know it's safe. You know that if your thing works, it will scale. That's quite a cool place to be if you kind of want to try something. But the other part of it is the fact that there are the services, and there seems like there's even more services coming out, in the fact that they actually can make whatever your core application is within it grow quickly, and you don't have to worry about them as much. So for me, going forward, yes, we're going to focus on how can we use, from a tech perspective, to make it faster, cheaper, and safer for the organization. But actually, for me, the biggest opportunity is how we can use this as an intervention to help the organization become faster and more innovative. Thanks.
Thank you, Ash. A lot of the stories that you've heard today have some of the same themes, and the themes are about taking advantage of opportunities presented because you've moved into the cloud. And that set of themes covers everything from the way organizations operate down through the hardware and the software that we operate them with. I think what our customers have told us repeatedly, though, is that they adore the infrastructure capabilities that we give them every single day, but they appreciate the way their organization can be different now because they have access to them. And innovation is at the core of all of that. And innovation is core in the security world as well. Our customers tell us that they feel they can be more secure operating in AWS than they were in their on-premises environment. And this is not one or two customers. This is the vast majority of customers. And largely that's due to changes in 3 important areas: visibility, auditability, and control. If you walk into your own corporate data center, point to a machine. What is that? Chances are the data center operator, if it's not labeled, will say, I'm not sure. How can you secure something you don't know what it is? Well, if it's there and you don't know what it is, unplug it, get rid of it, take it out. Oh no, that might be something important. We're not going to do that. I don't want to break the system. Okay, fine. Go find the person who put it there, figure out what it is so that we can properly secure it. Well, Tom did that, but he left 3 years ago. What? Come on, folks. This is a situation where you need to use the automation capabilities that APIs give you. It is impossible to hide a machine under the desk in the cloud. Every single infrastructure component that you use is reported in a log if you're using CloudTrail. So you can see exactly what's on your network at any point in time. And more importantly, you can secure that information reliably. We give you a number of tools that help you build rapidly, innovate quickly, and at the same time stay safe, and I'll talk a little bit about those right now. Amazon Inspector, this is near and dear to my heart. One of the things that we're asked pretty frequently by customers is take the knowledge that you have on your team and make it available to me as a service. So my team's responsible for application security reviews of all of our services. So everything that you see launched as a service or feature, all 700 and whatever it is, 6 I think as of September, 706, has to go through a security review by my team first before it gets out the door. And we use a lot of tooling to do those reviews. So when we're in conversations with our customers, they quite often say, I want that tool. And so we've started exposing them to customers. And Inspector is an example of that. It does security assessments as part of the build process. This is not a one-time thing, though you can run it in a single-use mode. It's designed to be part of a continuous deployment pipeline, so that every time you make a change to your infrastructure, you reassess the security of that infrastructure to ensure that it's meeting your requirements. It's pretty straightforward to use. You install an agent on your operating system, and the agents support a large number, I think it's like 17 different Linux variants, plus the typical Windows stuff that you'd expect. You run an assessment which determines how the infrastructure, the operating system and the apps that are installed compare to a series of security baselines that we provide or you define, and then you get a report out the other end of that. It's designed to interact with other AWS services. So as we add new rules and new capabilities over time, you get the benefit of those additions automatically. The engine that does the analytics here is literally the same process that we use internally to assume the assessment work on our own machines. It's available, of course, via an API, because everything in AWS is available via an API, but it's also available in the console. So if you have security professionals who may not be command line coders, they can use the tool through the console itself. The result, of course, is an improved security posture, principally because you get great visibility into what you have right now and reporting on it. Increased agility means you can make changes to your code path with the knowledge that you can test them for security sufficiency at the same velocity that you make those changes. One of the concerns that some customers had in the past is, I worry about enabling my developers to move so rapidly, my security team can't keep up with them. That's why you need to use tools like Inspector to help you do that more efficiently. The embedded expertise can't be overstated. As the knowledge from our team and our world of customers gets conveyed in code, you get to take advantage of that as well. And it helps your compliance process, by the way. We've been working with a number of the audit firms around the world to help them understand how to digest Inspector reporting so that when you're going for PCI compliance or a SOC report or ISO 27001, you can use the outputs of Inspector as inputs into that diligence process. This is what an Inspector finding report looks like on the console. You also can have a JSON version of that if you're more interested in command line and processing the data yourself. But the net result is that it tells you what you have, where it is, and most importantly, gives you suggested remediations for the problem. So it's not only telling you you've got an issue, but how to fix the problem as well. Another service in the same vein, AWS WAF, Web Application Firewalls. What are Web Application Firewalls? Most people know. It's a device or service that sits in between the big, nasty, dirty internet and your applications to help them operate without effect in the event of denial of service attacks or people trying to do injection attacks on your infrastructure, et cetera. AWS WAF features are the ones you'd expect. Web filtering is the number one. Prevent the following things from coming through and getting to my application on the back end. It integrates directly with CloudFront, which is our content delivery network, so you can deploy your mitigations globally at the 63 CloudFront locations around the world with a few clicks of a mouse or an API call. Built-in rules library. Some people love writing web application firewall rules. I am not one of them. So having a built-in library to choose from makes lives a lot easier, though of course you can write your own rules if you're so inclined. Real-time visibility. What's going on in my network right now, even though I'm using AWS's distributed environment through CloudFront? You get that visibility. Who's using your network? Who's trying what nasty, dirty tricks in trying to access your data where? And then how are you responding to block those attacks? API automation, of course, is at the heart of all of this. It allows you to make changes to the infrastructure as your security environment changes, or as your applications behind the WAF change as well. The net result, of course, is that you get increased protection against web attacks, and more importantly, you can build this into the development process itself. So you can build a CloudFormation template, for example, that says anytime one of my developers wants to deploy a new application, the security team automatically deploys WAF along with that application with a defined set of rules, so that you know when the app goes out the door that you're in a better place. Let's talk about how WAF works in principle. When you look at WAF in action, it is all about ensuring that the components come together at the right time in the right place. So as we said, it's available both via an API and via a console, which allows you to address different customer use cases. The API is typically used by developers who want to build the functionality in from the web application firewall as part of their normal development process. So for example, there are certain classes of applications that we have within AWS that when we're deployed, they automatically include WAF as part of the deployment process. It means that the developer doesn't even have to think about it because the template already has the protections built in. As a security professional, that makes me happier because not every developer is a security pro, and we need to be able to give them the advantage of our collective wisdom. Additionally, you have administrators who can choose to deploy WAF or change rule sets using the console. So somebody can be in the Security Operations Center, see an attack unfolding, and change the rules, apply new rules, new traffic mitigations to WAF in real time. And then, of course, it's deployed both in CloudFront and in other locations around the infrastructure. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about config rules. I talked a little bit earlier about the demonstration that Don Bailey did, and config rules is a great example of how you can use capabilities of our service to monitor how your employees are using our infrastructure, and then respond when something outside your expectation occurs. So config rules gives you a way to define a set of expectations for the infrastructure, a set of norms for what you want to be happening with your AWS infrastructure. I should have a firewall that looks like this in front of every EC2 instance that has a tag of production. Those are the kinds of rules that you can write. And moreover, you can take actions when those rules are not being followed. The customizable remediation portion of this is where you can define, I want to change that firewall to look like this if it does not already do so. Of course, it's all API automated so that you can drive this from a set of software, a set of code. Remember when I talked earlier about that sort of virtuous cycle of security with automation being at the very top of that diagram? Taking your security configuration and reducing it to code is one of the single most powerful changes you can make in your developer organization. Make it something that's easily consumable. Config rules benefits, obviously, shared compliance across your organization. If you all have to meet a common threshold, you can do so by using config rules to ensure that everybody's operating the same way. Continuous monitoring, we all want to know when something's not behaving the way we expect. And config rules gives you the power to do that. And simplified management of configuration changes. When something changes in your environment, you want to be able to take actions appropriate to that change. The net result, of course, is something that looks like this, a dashboard. There is, of course, an API as well. But the dashboard reports, where am I right now in comparison to where I want to be? Some actions I want to be warned about, in which case I'll get a pretty little non-compliant DAG up there, and I can dive in and see, is that something that really matters, or is it something I can go ahead and let proceed the way it is? Or I can take actions directly, as opposed to waiting. So let's put it all together. In the old world of operation, things are serial. There are steps that have to occur in a line. And the problem is that each one of those decision points, each one of those steps is an opportunity for an error. And what happens when you make an error in the third step? How do you remedy that? You have to go back to the beginning in many circumstances and restart the process. By putting it all together in an API-driven environment where you can iterate rapidly and make changes constantly, it gives you the ability to take a definition of standards, develop applications, and iteratively fix those applications as rapidly as possible. When you define a way a system should be functioning, you have software to check to see if it is functioning the way that you expect. You can change things in a very short period of time as opposed to waiting for some arbitrary security scan down the road. Staying compliant. We all have businesses that have to meet certain expectations for customer data. How do we prove that we are meeting those expectations over time? our global customer set has defined a series of expectations for us. They expect, for example, that we continue to meet their thresholds for compliance around the world, whatever that particular compliance regime may be exemplified by. They expect us to enable their innovation. As they accelerate their business, they should be able to do so securely and appropriately across AWS. They want to learn more about what their business is doing through the process of analytics. And analytics, by the way, is not just business analytics. It's also security analytics. One of the most fun conversations to have with customers who are new to the cloud, who are worried about moving to the cloud, is to say, take your security team. Have them move their log analytics into AWS. Why? Because it is a prototypical, no-question application that runs really, really well in the cloud. We handle vast volumes of data, and the ability to tear it apart, analyze it, mash it up again, really, really well. Security professionals are almost always constrained in how they can do that in their on-premises environment because security is seen as a cost to most businesses as opposed to an enabler. So you might not be able to keep the logs that you wanted to in your on-premises environment. You may not have enough cores available to do the log analytics that you want to as a security professional. Move that into AWS and see what you can learn about how your employees are using the data that they have access to and how your customers are interacting with you. The second benefit of that, of course, is the fact that then the security team gets used to operating in AWS. So they become the best in the business at understanding how to constrain access, how to ensure that people are using the tools appropriately, and can be beneficiaries to the rest of your organization as they move to the cloud. Common regulatory principles I want to leave you with here, of course, location of data. Customers ask us all the time, if I put my data with you, does it stay where I put it? Yes. It's a very simple answer. Yes, it does. So for example, if you want to put an object into Amazon S3, you can't say, Amazon, store this S3 object for me. You have to say, Amazon, store this S3 object for me in the EU West 1 region. You have to tell us what region of the world to put that data in, and we don't move it out of that region absent your instruction to do so. For areas where data locality is important, whether it's PII reasons or other regulatory reasons, that's of critical importance. Building in disaster recovery and business continuity and resiliency, we'll talk in a moment a little bit more about that. But data protection and the security of that data is something that's fundamentally important to most business. When you have data that you place in AWS, one of the things that I would ask you to do in closing this particular portion of the conversation is encrypt it. In many circumstances, you can use our default encryption at no cost. Tick the box in the console, and your data is encrypted when it's sitting on disk. I am happiest when the only access my staff has to your data is ciphertext. It's fewer chances for error, it's fewer chances for problem, it's better for all of us. Encrypt the data when you have a chance, please. There are levels of encryption you can choose. You can bring your own keys if you want to and use our key management service to distribute those keys to your applications or our services. Or you can use something like Cloud HSM, which is a hardware security appliance where a third party has verified that you are the only person who can have access to the cryptographic functions contained therein. So even though my staff can physically touch the box, they can't get to your cryptographic keys. And for some customers, that's critically important to the way their data is secured. Now, talking about regulated industries, of course, one thinks about financial services. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Marco Pera, Global Head of Platform Management at HSBC.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you today. I'm the Global Head of Platform Management, which involves evolving the platforms that we use to power our products and evolving the business operations required to run them. And I'm a banker at HSBC, one of the leading financial institutions. We operate across a wide variety of countries, languages, cultures, financial products, and regulations. In our size and complexity and diversity, we're united by a very strong purpose. And my favorite part is towards the end of it, helping people fulfill their hopes and dreams and realize their ambitions. And we have to do this in a world that is constantly changing. Digital is disrupting banking. and customer expectations are evolving very fast. Last year, we have observed a very rapid shift from branch ATM and cash towards mobile banking and mobile payments. And at the same time, a rapid increase in cybercrime, thankfully coupled with the maturity of increasing numbers of real-time intelligence solutions and biometrics. At HSBC, we're investing heavily in digital. We want to drive the digital transformation in the financial services sector. We have recently announced the creation of HDS. We love acronyms. It stands for HSBC Digital Solutions. More than 2,000 people coming together from different parts of the business and technology and our partners to create and evolve the next generations of products and platforms. And this is backed by a significant financial investment, particularly around 3 key pillars. First, we have a mobile-first strategy. Mobile banking is key, mobile payments is key. A lot of our customers can already enjoy Apple Pay and Android Pay in a lot of our major markets. And we also realize we have to be where our customers are. So for example, right now, we're very busy integrating with WeChat. Second is data, big data, real-time data, machine intelligence. We want to deliver a personal, relevant, timely, contextual, preference-driven, personal experience to every single one of our customers. But that requires a new approach, a new way to think about data, and new capabilities. And last but not least, we need to widen the adoption of biometrics. Touch ID is now in a lot of our apps in our major markets, and we have rolled out to many millions of our customers voice login. So how do we go in the right direction? Well, we had to rethink our platforms from the ground up. We're a bank. We're big, we're complex, we run mainframes, we grew by acquisition. Our backends aren't easy. So we had to spend some good time rethinking, what is that architecture? What are those layers of the architecture? How do we enable agility in that architecture? And that is cloud at its heart. And no surprise, because we're here, we're working with AWS, and largely because of their pedigree in the enterprise space, and because of the level of control that we can have on every service that we choose to adopt. We started our journey, we spent some good time with the AWS architects, and you wouldn't be surprised to hear that HSBC starts architecting with security first. So we have VPCs that enable us to manage the servicing, the security, the auditability, the automation. We have others that allows us to partition our applications. We can manage our infrastructure as public-facing or completely private. We have dedicated secure connectors. We have integrated with our command centers that we enable single sign-on. Quite a lot of work is going into the designing and the thinking of how we want to adopt these technologies. We started the journey to adopting cloud technologies early in this year. We had a real problem to solve. We were going to announce at the World Economic Forum the start of a study, a 3-month-long study with some of our real customers in the UK to try the concept of nudge banking. Think of nudge banking as a fitness instructor for your spending and saving habits. Someone can nudge you to have sort of better behaviors. We needed an app, and we needed an app fast, and the World Economic Forum wasn't going to change for us. And we managed to build and deploy an app in 6 weeks. But of course, that required a different approach. Today, AWS is an integral part of our end-to-end DevOps toolchain that enables our cross-functional teams to create and iterate services and products. We're moving away from the world where we have large IT programs that take many years to complete, have quarterly or even longer monolithic drops. We have smaller, agile, cross-functional teams creating production-ready code and integrating it every day, every week, every fortnight as they see fit. This gives us agility, speed to market. Our development processes are simpler, faster, repeatable, controlled, and the quality is going up. And our teams are happier because they can see their products realizing in a faster time. It also gives us the ability to innovate faster. We can finally try new technologies, work with new partners, try new approaches in a safe environment. Iterate, fail fast, evolve. 3 key tips if you're about to embark on your cloud journey. One is start with intent. Find a project, something important, something urgent, something you couldn't do with traditional approaches that will help you bring your internal stakeholders together, and you'll show some value early on in the journey. Second is try to understand why you want to use some of these technologies. Spend some good time designing them. Give the opportunity to your teams to operate them in a safe environment. They'll make mistakes at the beginning. That's OK. Give them support. So by the time you go to prime time and run some proper business services with it, you'll be ready. They'll be ready. And last but not least, don't see that as just a tech replacement exercise. Think about how you're going to evolve the way your teams think and operate, because that's where the big opportunity is. Thank you.
At the heart of many conversations with highly regulated customers is the question of governance. And governance is the process by which we ensure that we meet our objectives, and we do so in a fashion that we can stay with a straight face to our customers. We're protecting their information successfully. And the customer governance model in AWS is a little bit different than it is in many hosted or on-premises environments. If you're running your own data center, you are responsible singularly for all of the controls that you need to meet your particular environment. One of the powerful things you can do when you move into AWS is to offload a lot of that work. There are only so many ways, for example, that you can operate a data center in terms of gates and guards and CCTV systems. And we do that successfully on behalf of many customers, but more importantly, we're audited as to how we do that. And you can use the results of those audits to help you verify that you're meeting your particular sets of requirements. So along with our infrastructure, of course, is the foundational services that you see in the orange blocks. Above those in the blue, though, are pieces that you as business owners need to decide how you are going to choose to use them. For some things, for example, it's critically important that you encrypt all of your network traffic because you're very concerned about exposure. Other customers, of course, have traffic that they intend to make available to the entire public, and as a result, aren't as worried about the encryption, or because they're using legacy devices that don't have the horsepower necessary to implement modern encryption, they may not be able to encrypt that data. Above that are layers like how do you choose your operating system, how do you configure it, what are the firewall rules associated with it, and the platform identity management pieces that you use to make your system work together and tie back to your on-premises environment, like, for example, federating back to your identity pools on-premises. Governance in the cloud, of course, has components that are business sourcing related, technology related, security related, and compliance related. You probably have staff, if you're a larger organization, who specialize in one area of these or another. What we encourage you to do is to have those staff read the white papers and the best practice documents that we have that focus in each one of those categories. Take advantage of the opportunities there to educate your teams, for example, in the risk departments on how do we achieve the controls that we say we do. Have them read the SOC reports. Have them read the ISO 27001 documentation that describes the security controls. It answers almost all of the common questions that we have from customers. The rest of the common questions are answered in our security white papers and our compliance white papers. I'll put a couple of URLs up on the screen at the end, but I encourage your teams to take a look at those. Governance in and of the cloud is a cycle. And I say in and of because they are two different functions that have to work together. Governance of the cloud is my job. The compliance team at AWS reports to me, but it is an area where we focus every single day. Governance in the cloud is something you get to decide about. How is it important to your organization, and how do you want to fit into that cycle? Do you have a security strategy with a stakeholder communication plan already built? Do you have a security cartography, which is a description of how all your services work together, and have you documented that appropriately? Do you have runbooks and playbooks by which you can instruct your team on what they should do in both building secure systems, but also operating them and responding when something goes bump in the night? You need to have those responses defined ahead of time to be successful in the process of operating security. Response simulations. With all of our large customers, we execute simulated response activities because we want to ensure that if something were to happen, they have a way to contact us, they know how to ask for the right things in terms of forensic support, and that they can take the right actions rapidly enough to regain control of their systems and ensure that they don't have data loss. So how is disaster recovery and business continuity assured in AWS? It's an area that many more customers are focusing on, especially in businesses that have particular requirements there. Game days, like the security game day that I just talked about, are critically important. Some of the most popular examples of this, for example, Netflix has a series of tools that they call Chaos Monkey and Security Monkey that kill various pieces of their infrastructure randomly. People say, how can you possibly do that? Well, if you build your infrastructure properly, it should recover from various pieces not becoming functional over time. And the only way to really exercise that is to actually test it. So using tooling to cause problems in your infrastructure will find situations where you don't have the right recovery built in. Validating that, of course, assessing it is a necessary part of any testing regime, and reconstitution after one of those outage simulations is key. So how do customers build for resiliency? There is a continuum, of course, and it's everything from backup and recovery. So an example of backup and recovery, the United States Federal Emergency Management Administration, they're the people who do the recovery operations after a hurricane comes through, for example, uses AWS. And they started using AWS in a disaster recovery mode where we were the DR backup for their on-premises data center. After a period of operating on AWS, they realized that their uptime, availability, and scalability was better in AWS than it was in their on-premises data center, so they flipped the direction, and they're operating in AWS. They've told us that they intend on disposing of that data center as soon as they're permitted to do so by Congress, because it's so much more effective to operate in AWS. Now, backup DR is one way to operate. It's not what I would prefer. Because there are always changes in environments, and there are always things that differ between a backup site and an operational site. So the next step in the continuum is the sort of pilot-light environment. A pilot-light environment is where you have a few machines operating that host the most difficult to synchronize data. For example, databases are notoriously difficult to operate across a DR regime. And doing a pilot-light environment means you've got the database running in AWS, you've got the database running in your on-premises environment. You continue to operate it like that, and if something happens, you can spin up all the rest of the infrastructure in AWS to complement that database operation that's there. Warm standby is closer to where most customers should be. Warm standby means that you've got all of the types of machines functioning in AWS, but not the quantity of machines that you need. So you know that you can spin them up, you know that they function well together, you know that they have the network connectivity that they require, and you can access them as you need. The last step in that process, of course, is multi-site. This is the way we run internally. So for example, Amazon.com doesn't operate in a disaster recovery mode. What Amazon.com does is they operate multi-site, where they have 20% more capacity across the entirety of their infrastructure than they require to operate. They can lose an entire availability zone in US East, for example, with no effect on their ability to operate the entirety of their process. They don't have to bring up any additional data center sites to operate successfully. The only way you can do that is by operating live across all of your infrastructure operations. So how do we prove what we do on your behalf? The audit reports. SOC 2 audit reports are the validation of our security controls. ISO 27001 certification is another view on that same set of things. I put this slide in here to reinforce the fact that if your security and audit teams have not yet read these, please get them to do so. And I promise to give you a set of pointers to areas that you would find interesting if you're interested in security. aws.amazon.com/security/compliance and /blog/security are all resources which should help you find what you need. I really enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you very much for the opportunity to do so. And please enjoy the hospitality of our sponsors and the opportunity to see all the cool things that are out there with the vendors who are there today. Thank you.